Welcome into Think Deeper podcast, presented by Focus Press. I'm one of your hosts, Jack Wilkie, of course, joined by Joe Wilkie and Will Harab. Before we get started today, I don't have anything to advertise, anything to tell you about. I just want to recap a little bit. We spoke about alcohol last week. We spoke about boycotting the week before. We spoke about substances with the alcohol last week. I wrote an article. We've made a lot of friends along the way. We've had some people very mad at us. We've had a lot of respectful dialogue with people who disagree with us, which is what we hope for when you disagree with us, is that would happen. And we've had positive reinforcement of people who agreed with us, and we're thankful we said things the way that we did. When we recorded the episode, I knew it was a controversial issue on alcohol and substances. And there's things looking back, I think I disagree with things that were said in the moment. You can go back and listen. And things I think I would say differently. Overall, I think we would agree that we'd hold to the point the way that we did. But when it went up and a friend messaged me, oh, wow, you guys are taking that on. And it hit me what we had discussed. I thought, man, why were we so open with our takes? Why did we say some of the things we did? And man, maybe we should have toned that down a little bit. No, we shouldn't have. We're going to do things as best as we know how. Our job is to present the text as faithfully as we can. And that's one of the things I hope people appreciate about this podcast. There are a lot of ways in which a Christian publishing company, Christian outlet can become a caricature where you know what they're going to say about everything. We don't want to be that. And we want to be people who are doing our best to get the text right as it is. That does not mean we're going to get it right every time. That does not mean we're even going to agree with each other all the time. You've heard that if you're a longtime deep thinker, that sometimes we don't agree with each other. That's okay. And as I said last week, I really hope that there's a lot of people that like us and think we're great and all that, I hope that when the first disagreement drops, that you don't go, oh, wow, they're terrible, I'm moving on. It's, well, I think they got that one wrong. But on the whole, I think they're doing a good work. I hope that is the perception that's out there. But as I was saying, I'm proud of the fact that we don't hide from the takes. We don't give you a canned scripted thing that is exactly what you'd expect and towing the line of what's expected of us. Again, you should not be able to put somebody's theology into a box and say, well, you're this kind of person and I know everything you believe about everything because I know one thing about you. The Bible is open to interpretation on things. The Bible takes some study, some difficulty on that. And so in the writing we do, in the podcasting we do, in all of that, our duty is not to conform to an opinion. Our duty is not to do anything except try and be faithful to what we believe God says. If we can be shown otherwise, we'll change, we'll change course. We've had things sent to us. I think our argumentation still holds up well. We all should try and be open-minded because we're all working towards something together here. And I hope that is the feel that everyone has from this. I hope that you might be able to appreciate that we are not going to give you a canned scripted answer. We're going to think through it. We're going to think deeper. That is what we're here for. That's why we named it that, is so that we can have discussions you might not have elsewhere. Sometimes we get to thinking out loud a little bit, speculating without putting the time into research, maybe a little bit off the top of our head. And that gets us in some trouble, maybe some things that we wouldn't say the same way again. That's going to happen when you talk as much as we do. And we regret those parts of it. But in general, we hope you're along with the ride for us. We hope that makes sense, that we're not trying to conform or fit to any box other than what the text says, and we're going to try and go where that leads. And so I wanted to get ahead of that. I wanted to get ahead of one other thing. There was an accusation and followed up by other people who agreed that, man, Focus Press does everything they do for the views. They're just clout chasing. They're just trying to get a big name for themselves off of saying controversial things. Saying some of the things that we've said has gotten us uninvited from speaking engagements at times. It has lost us friends. It has made it to where when you espouse a certain idea, there are things that you will never be invited to. There are people who automatically don't like you. All the flack we got over last week, if we were clout chasing, we're just not very good at it. I mean, I'm sorry, if we're just doing this for views, we're not very good at it. There are people who get mad and walk away. And so if we were doing it for views, we would tell you exactly what you want to hear. That's not what we're going to do. And so that's what I wanted to say off the top, not as a way of patting ourselves on the back, but as saying we're just trying to be faithful to the text, trying to be faithful to the word. That is our biggest concern. And we hope you're along with the ride for us. And so before we get into today's episode, I wanted to get that off my chest. You can say a lot of things about me. Don't say that we're saying things we don't actually believe for the views. That's not something we will ever do. We are going to tell you how we best see the text fits the interpretation. Do you guys have anything on top of that before? I know I kind of went long on the monologue there. I just wanted to get that out there. Anything to add before we jump into the episode?
I thought that was very well said. The one thing that I'll just briefly add is something that I've put in response to some things on Facebook as well. We're passionate about the church. We're passionate about the things that we believe about the church. We're passionate about the things that we see as not going well with the church. And I think that's something that gets pointed out about us a lot, is that, well, you guys are always negative, or you're pointing out what the church is doing wrong, and that's counterproductive or whatever to the church. We're passionate and want to see change. That's all it is. It's not trying to be harsh. It's not trying to pick on people. It's not trying to go around make enemies or clout chase or anything like that. We're passionate about the things that we see from God's word, the things that we know that we as families can do better. And so we talk about those things. And I don't think it would be responsible of us to go the route that a lot of people want us to go, which is just talk about how great everything is all the time, when quite frankly, it's not great. I mean, you look at the statistics, you look at everything we've talked about. Churches are shrinking, young people are leaving. For us to get if we had a weekly podcast on how great the church is doing X, Y, and Z, and how great everything is, and the skies is just nothing but rainbows and blue skies, first of all, nobody would listen. But second of all, it's not true. This is a really big deal. The problems that the church is facing, we feel like they need to be addressed, and we're passionate about it. So that's all I wanted to say, is that, like Jack said, the accusations of clout chasing or doing it for clicks or views are just ridiculous. But we are passionate. We hope that our listeners share that passion, because these are things that we need to address. We've got so many broken worldly families. It's time to start examining things and determine what's gotten us to this point. So that's all we want to do. That's all I had to add.
Yeah, all I'd add is it's okay if you disagree with us. We expect you to disagree with us at some point. We are think deeper. We're just trying to get you, as Jack said, to get you to think deeper on things, and that's our main goal. And you know what? If we towed the company line, so to speak, on every last thing, and you never had to think outside the box, then we would just be called think regular. We wouldn't be think deeper. That's the point, is we're going to try to get to the bottom of what we believe in scripture. And if you say, hey, that's not how I interpret it, we're open to discussion. Check the nastiness at the door. Check the gossip and going behind our backs at the door. And
The
wow, did you
vitriol,
hear this?
yeah.
Look, the vitriol that you're spewing. Hey, come talk to us. We're people. You see our Facebook profiles. Feel free to message us. If you have a problem, that's okay. We know that we're gonna disagree, and we're gonna, say some things. Look, I have hot takes with Joe. I realize it's pretty controversial in some situations. I get that not everybody's gonna agree. That's okay. That's okay. We'll still fellowship with one another. I hope you'll still fellowship me and us. But yeah, it's okay that we disagree. I think the brotherhood needs a little more of ability to just hash out some of these discussions and go from there. So that's all I would add to it. Will, I
Well
think you
said.
had
Oh,
the
yeah,
outline for
Will's
this one.
leading the way, so go ahead.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So today is June 19th. Juneteenth became a federal holiday last year. And so with today being Juneteenth, we thought it was appropriate. It would be appropriate to address kind of some things surrounding racism, surrounding should a Christian celebrate Juneteenth. We did a critical race theory episode. It was last year. I don't remember when it was. I want to say summertime, maybe, could be wrong, but it was last year. And we talked about just all the problems associated with that perspective, that viewpoint, that theory, the what is being taught in schools, what our young people are really being indoctrinated with through schools and through social media. And so I'd encourage you, if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen. We wanted to look at it, I guess, more so from a broader perspective with this episode, because obviously for the CRT episode, we really drilled down on the tenets of critical race theory and all the biblical problems with it. And so again, we want to take a bit of a broader sense with this particular episode. Again, centered around Juneteenth. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And really the two questions we're going to be addressing, and I'm sure we'll find some more here along the way, but really, how should a Christian view the concept of race? And I'm going to go ahead and preview kind of the sides here, and then we're going to save that for a little bit later of a discussion. But just to kind of get your gears turning on what we're going to be going for here, I'm sure a lot of people have heard the Morgan Freeman quote when he was asked about race and Black History Month. And Morgan Freeman said, well, the solution is to just stop talking about it. Just don't acknowledge it. And a lot of people hold that viewpoint, like, hey, quit bringing it up. Don't even talk about it. And to be honest, I think there's a lot of merit with that. But there's also an opposing viewpoint that says, no, we are different. We shouldn't hide behind those differences. We should celebrate those differences and not be afraid to talk about the differences. Just the same thing as not blending a man and a woman together, celebrating the differences and talking about the differences. There is a side that would say we should do the exact same thing when it comes to race. Don't bury it and act like it doesn't exist, but celebrate the differences and then highlight the differences and not be afraid of those things. So we're going to get to that discussion a little bit later, but I did want to get you as the audience, again, kind of your gears turning as far as where we're going to be heading with that, maybe what you think heading into this discussion about that. How should a Christian view the concept of race? But let's start with the kind of the Juneteenth question here, because this has really been something that has been on the forefront just for the last couple of years. I was telling them before I got on, I was talking to some people who didn't even know that it was a federal holiday, because it is so new. I've been talking for a minute. I don't know if one of you guys wants to get into kind of the history of Juneteenth. Obviously, it was President Biden made it a federal holiday last year, but it's one of those things that the history goes way back, and the reason for the history, why we want to get into the history of it, is because it ties into this discussion of should we be celebrating it? Is this something that we as Christians have a legitimate claim to, that we should celebrate it? Can a Christian not celebrate it? A lot of questions going into this. So Joe or Jack, either one of y'all, I'll hand it to you to kind of get into the history and then how that plays into where we are today.
Yeah, so President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, kind of ending slavery, but there's a lot going on there. I mean, half the nation was still claiming to not be under his authority at that point. And so there's a lot going on around that. And so Juneteenth was 2 years later, June 19th, 1865, when the Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas, with news of freedom. I mean, obviously they couldn't, there's no internet. You didn't get the Twitter update of, all right, we're free now. There's no phone call. And so the war had to conclude. And then it had to be, the news had to be marched to them of, you're not slaves anymore. You've been freed. This decree has come down, and so it became known as Juneteenth, or Freedom Day, June 19th, 1865. As you said, became a federal holiday in 2021, under a lot of the momentum from 2020, with all of just so much discussion around then, which we covered a lot of that in our critical race theory episode last August, and so I'm not going to get into that side of it, but it is one of those things that I think, we say it's kind of come into public consciousness. I think, for a lot of Black folks, they knew it. They were well aware of it. Like, this was something that mattered to them. And now it's become nationally more relevant, more accepted, more widespread in the last few years. And it was something I remember hearing about as a kid. I didn't know what it was. It was not really something that even showed up on all the calendars. I mean, it was a bit of a fringe thing that it's not anymore. And so that is the origin of it. 1865. It is about the ending of slavery. And so it's kind of an Independence Day of its own, is what it's framed as sometimes. And so that is that background that we have on it, just to catch up if you're not familiar.
Our nation's second Freedom Day is something that I read. Like that's how they frame it, is we have obviously July 4th, but that a large majority of the country was not free at that point, which is true. And so they view this Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, as the day that everybody was free. So this gets us into this discussion. And Joe, I'll hand it to you because you've been quiet so far. What do we do with this? Because let's be honest, culture and society has kind of hijacked this Juneteenth celebration. On the surface, should a Christian celebrate Juneteenth? Ideally, sure. The idea that, hey, it's a part of our history. First of all, it is true that there were a lot of people that were not free that became free on June 19th, 1865. Why not celebrate?
We do celebrate that's Cinco de Mayo.
Right. I mean, that's a reason to celebrate, and that's great.
Kind of.
Yeah. Celebrate
Mexican food. That's a little different. Yeah. and that's another country's holiday even, but
it is. But again, it is observed as a holiday. Many people get it off. It is a holiday of freedom that is not necessarily connected to July 4th. So we could say, well, just in this country, well, we celebrate that one. So I think you're right. Ideally, Juneteenth is not, it's not a problem. So where then are we coming from? I guess we could end the podcast there if that's all we were going to cover. But I think that there are cultural connotations associated with Juneteenth that make this problematic, in our opinion. And I'm going to list some of these, fellas. I'm going to turn it back over to you to kind of get us into these of what you think, and to take off on some of these. But I think things like Black Lives Matter, as Jack talked about, this is coming off of 2020 and some of the riots and some of the things. There was a lot of issues going on in 2020 connected to George Floyd. And again, we've talked about some of those things, but rising out of that, and it was there before, but very much Black Lives Matter came to the forefront. Black Power. We started to see more things, in my opinion, than ever start to shift toward like the two national anthems, the separate national anthems that the NFL is doing, and things like that. And so I think those are the connotations that come along with the race discussion. Juneteenth opens the door to that. On the surface, I wouldn't say Juneteenth is wrong to celebrate. At the same time, it's opening or bringing in all of these different connotations. And so, fellas, I guess I'll throw it back to you. Like, where do we want to start with this? Maybe get us into some of the first of those are the cultural connotations. What are your thoughts on something like, I'll put you on the spot here, but the Black Lives Matter movement, especially as it's pertaining to race relations and such?
Jack, you going or me?
Go for it.
I think the Black Lives Matter organization has been exposed as fraudulent pretty clearly. I think if you're somebody who supports the organization, supports everything that they riot for, you need to do a little bit more research and take a look at really what all that entails. So I'm not really going to talk about that because I think that's a pretty open and shut case that Christians don't really have any business supporting that movement. But what about the other side that, the black, remember the black profile pictures that everybody was doing right around the time of George Floyd in 2020? Everybody was updating their profile picture to a black screen. And it was noble for a lot of people, to support the what they viewed as the oppressed people. It was one of those like, hey, let's show support. That's what I want to ask you guys, like, that more so the saying of, hey, Black Lives Matter. Like, of course, we agree that Black Lives Matter. We would agree that all lives matter. So what would you guys have to say? Let's take the organization side out of it. The company, the movement that has very much been exposed as fraudulent. Set that aside. What would you guys have to say to the Black Lives Matter idea of blacking out your profile picture? Just stuff like that. That we see a lot of Christians are very vocal about that. Hey, we should support this. We should support this movement. We should support that idea. What would you say to that?
It is very much the kind of thing that is hard to talk about because everybody are very bad at separating fact from emotion. And so when you look at fact of, that there is a problem, there are things, I agree. I mean, some of those things that have happened between police and African Americans, and some of the videos that get out, and it's like, yeah, that's terrible. That is open and shut. But you saw how quickly it went off the rails. The guy in Milwaukee that the whole NBA shut down over, where
Jacob Blake, I think, was his name.
A very dangerous man. He had a knife in his car, and the woman had a restraining order against him because of how dangerous he was, and he becomes a martyr. And he was he was wrongfully killed, and it's kind of there's no breaks on this. It's all emotional narrative, and there's no what are the facts of the matter. And the facts of the matter is this is something that, in a nation of 300 million people, and I'm not justifying any of the ones that have happened, but this is a very small occurrence, and a lot of them have circumstances that make this way more than an open and shut case. And so when you get into the difficulty of all these things, because one of the other things about it is, even when somebody is killed, you have the burden of proof of proving that it was racially motivated. And so there's a lot of proofs that have been assumed when we say we've got this racial problem for which we have to protest. And so to that, when somebody, says, well, we need to say Black Lives Matter, in a sense, it feels like the have you stopped beating your wife thing. Will you say Black Lives Matter? Like, why do you think I don't think that? Why do I need to say that? I don't need to say white lives matter, Mexican lives matter, children's lives matter, old elderly people's lives matter. That's not in question. I don't think anybody should be killed wrongfully. I think there is a time in which if a man is an existential threat to somebody, as a man going for a knife was, that is justice, that came upon him. And so These things are case by case, and they're all lumped into one big thing. And again, like I said, I think it is very much a have you stopped beating your wife thing. And we as Christians have to do better at sorting through emotional narrative to get to fact.
And not just emotional narrative. We have to do better at sorting through cultural narrative. You know what hasn't been on the forefront in the last 6 months? Any of this stuff. It's
Right.
been transgender lives matter. It's been they've kind of moved on to something
Really,
completely
since the
different.
election. Let's be honest, since the
Yeah,
election.
go figure, right? And so when I say you have to be able to sift through the culture narrative, you have to be mindful of this is what they want you. This is what a lot of people want you to be riled up about. Case in point, all the stories that make national headlines, right? The names that people recognize. Ahmaud Arbery was another one. What was her name? Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Trayvon Martin was a big one. And all of these that get kind of held up as racially motivated killings. You do your research and you actually look at basically the facts of every single case. There are cases that are pretty much identical to those that happen, where the only thing that's different is that the races are reversed. Those don't get any press. Zero. Vodi Bakum wrote a book called Fault Lines that I highly recommend, kind of about CRT, where he pointed this stuff out. He would take these stories that made national headlines, and he would cite another story that was, again, the races were simply reversed. And those stories, like I'd never heard of these, and most people had never heard of these because they didn't make the headlines. And so we have to be, not like Jack said with the emotional narrative, the cultural narrative as well. You have to be, don't buy into everything that you're reading, that you're seeing, what they're wanting you to be upset about. We have to be able to sift through that.
It's an important point, and again, to some people, this is going to be very emotionally. Like there's going to be something that angers you. There's going to be a response to this of no, this is all wrong. But Will kind of raises a question there that has to be answered. Did the protests and the activism and everything that happened in 2020, did it solve the problem? Because we're not being told about these things. The marches stopped, the protests stopped, the riots stopped, all of the names, the hashtags, the social media activism, all of those things, the shutting down highways, everything that was happening in that crazy 6 month span just stopped. Why did it stop? Did we solve the problem, or did they just take the spotlight off of it? And these things are still happening, but there's no spotlight being shown on them. Because one of the other things that you see is there's just a timing to these. 2020, 2016, the years where these are most hotly debated are election years. And if you don't believe the media does this, in 2000 they were bored and they turned the attention onto shark attacks. We've got shark attacks, another shark attack in Florida, another shark attack in California. It cost businesses on the Gulf Coast and all, on coastal regions, I think it was estimated in the billions of dollars in lack of tourism because people were scared to death of sharks. At the end of the year, the statistically, the difference was negligible. Like it was fine. There was no difference. They just decided that's what we're going to cover. In the same sense, what Will's saying is, and my question is, did these things stop? And if so, where is the victory lap for, hey, the protesting worked and the activism worked? Or is it still happening? And next time they tell you to get mad about it, you're going to get mad about it, even though you haven't been for 3 or 4 years.
So when we get into things like Black Lives Matter, going back to just the hashtag and not, as Will, you're talking about, not the nonprofit or the organization, but the hashtag itself, when you said all lives matter, that was a real problem. Right. I mean, they said, well, that delegitimizes Black Lives Matter. And it's not about the white lives. It's not about any of the other lives. It's about the Black lives right now. And that's who we need to be focusing on. And to me, I feel like in turning the spotlight toward it, that is very divisive. And they want inclusion. They want inclusion. They want inclusion. And then as soon as we start pointing out, okay, let's talk about inclusion. No, I want to exclude anybody that's not part of the Black Lives Matter. And so it's, all lives matter. We can't say those things. Well, I think we can, and I think we should say those things. I understand where they're coming from, but to me, it kind of points to a little bit of the hypocrisy that's going on, and it speaks to the hypocrisy of, Will, what you were discussing. If a African American cop shoots a white male, a Caucasian male, is that racially motivated? Well, no, because we just assume, okay, well, the white man must have been doing something that was against the law. Reverse it, and that doesn't mean that every single one of them is accurate. And there's been some that I look at and go, man, that's not good. But instead of looking at it as, wow, that police officer went way beyond what he should have, it's race. It must have been race. This happens all the time. It happens statistically more to whites than it does to African Americans. The media doesn't want you to know that. So it's the hypocrisy that I think is what we really need to be calling out.
Well, and why this is all wrapped up in this discussion is because of with the Juneteenth discussion, this question that you're bringing up, Joe, is it adding to the divisiveness unnecessarily? I'm sure you guys remember in 2020, I did not enjoy getting on social media. I did not enjoy getting on Facebook because it was the COVID thing that Christians were kind of tearing each other apart over. The racism stuff seemed like that was the only thing in the headlines. There was just so many. The country was so divided. And of course, it's been that way for a while, but it just seemed like it was on the forefront more, I guess, with social media and things. And so that's really why we're asking this question: is like, is celebrating things like Juneteenth, is separate national anthems, which I'm going to come down and say I don't think under any circumstances we should have two separate national anthems. I've heard people argue, okay, well, the original national anthem has a racist second verse. Okay, then let's compromise and come together on a different national anthem. Having two separate ones to me is ridiculous. We don't need to be divided, and obviously I feel like that's with where we are. We're going to be divided for a while just because that's what culture pushes it, and it's unfortunate. But why we're asking this and why we're bringing this up in discussion is because of the question: should a Christian celebrate Juneteenth? By me celebrating Juneteenth, am I adding to the divisiveness? Am I adding to all this stuff that we brought up that just gets people emotionally triggered? So should we just kind of leave it alone? I don't know if that's kind of where we want to end the discussion. So I don't know if we want to get into that right now, but all this stuff gets tied in because, I mean, you guys remember just the vitriol that was spewed all across social media when this stuff was going on. It was not an enjoyable time to be on Facebook or anything like that. And I don't know. I think it's very, very difficult. Go ahead.
I was going to say the social pressure was the problem that I think, once again, you're looking at as you're talking. It was the social pressure to kind of bow down to the movement, to bow down to these things, to post the blacked out profile picture and to post Black Lives Matter. And it was the social pressure that, again, anytime a white person looked to say something, well, you can't possibly know. And so you're cutting full portions of society out to make room for this, for a part of society that has been downtrodden. No doubt they have been through a lot in some ways. I'm not looking to discount other people, but you know who else went through a whole lot in a lot of ways? There's been some of the Indian Americans, the Native Americans, I even think some of the Irish and the way that they were discriminated against going back to New York. I mean, they had parts of town, the Jewish people that had come over, there were parts of town where they couldn't go. They had to start their own places. The Chinese Americans that had come over, and that's how they have Chinatown and things like that, is they formed their own culture within these cities because they were oppressed. Oppression is a part of society and a part of society figuring things out. What I don't think helps societies figure things out is to shut down any discussion from any dissenting opinion and to cater all to one side. The reason why I think All Lives Matter is important is because it caters to everybody's point of view and everybody's part of the discussion, because there are multiple races that America represents. We're the great melting pot of the world. That's what makes us great. So why would we cut off entire portions of people's ability to speak because, well, you can't understand this experience? Yeah, but you can't understand theirs. You can't understand what Irish immigrants went through. You can't understand what some of the people from Ellis Island went through. You say, well, how's that worse than slavery? I'm not trying to compare the social woes and the horrible things that have happened in the past and the problems and the suffering. I'm not trying to say one's better or the worse. I'm trying to say many people have suffered. We don't want to take voices away and elevate one as, well, I've suffered the most. Okay, that doesn't mean other people haven't.
That's the critical theory thing that Jack's brought up multiple times, right. And the critical race theory aspect.
Intersectionality too.
Well, yeah, and the oppression thing, because the other issue with that is it's not striving to bring everybody together. It's striving to flip things around. Right. And so it's not, I just want to be right there with you. And it's kind of the Mott and Bailey fallacy of that's what it's presented as is equality, but it's really not. Because, there are special privileges advocated for and special recognition that is not universally we want to reverse the order. Well, no, we don't reverse the order. And, about the two national anthems thing, there are more Hispanic Latino people in America than there are African American. I mean, like you look at the demographics, it's white, Hispanic, Latino, African American, and then it breaks down into different, Asian and where people are from. How many national anthems do we need? I mean, can we have a third? Can we have a fourth? I mean, like how we're going to be standing for the 30 minutes before the football game at a certain point if we keep this up. And so to the question of Juneteenth, I absolutely, and this is my point about are we trying to come together or trying to flip things around? I think it should be celebrated that we ended slavery, like that we as a country don't have that anymore. That should be on our holidays as we look back in the past and go, man, we as a nation outgrew that. The problem is if it is held up as, well, we get our day and you get yours, that doesn't really work out as a country. You can't come together as a country. You can't persist together. I mean, this is scriptural advice, of can two go together if they're not in agreement. And if we're living our parallel but opposite lives of, you've got your community over here and you've got your holidays and we've got ours, and we don't cross, and you don't celebrate ours and we don't celebrate yours. And you have your national anthem and you're going to take a knee during one and stand up for the other. And it's not going to be vice versa. Because again, this isn't about equality. Like this is not a long-term solution unless your long-term solution is we win, you lose. Neither side should be approaching this with we win, you lose. It should be, how do we live together? And how we live together is not, this kind of comes into parenting sometimes, right? Of, oh, well, my kids, they both want the same toy and they're fighting over it and we got a problem. I'll just buy them both their own toy. I'll make sure they each have their own. So there's never any. No, you learn to share. You learn to get along. You learn to work through these things. And so we should celebrate the ending of slavery. We should celebrate the day Roe v. Wade was overturned. We should celebrate a lot more of the things that we've done well, because it reminds us of the bad things that we've done, which is a big part of this whole thing of like pointing back constantly to the ugliness of this country and never giving credit that we've come a long way, right? And so we should celebrate that we've come out of slavery. We should celebrate that we ended abortion. We should celebrate, some of the things that we used to do and don't anymore as a positive step forward. And we should do that together, not make it, okay, you have your holiday and enjoy and we'll kind of clap while you celebrate. That doesn't work that way for unity's sake.
Well, and is it ever enough? Right? Where is it ever enough? How much do we give in terms of equality until, like you said, Jack, the script is flipped? And what we see is, you see that man in Florida that was advocating for every African American in the country, I think, to get, I want to say $32 million, I think is what it was in reparations. And so he was speaking in front of, I don't know.
Racist. I would give him 33 million.
Wow.
Where does it stop? That's what I'm saying. Where does it stop? Like, at what point have we reached the, okay, now we've kind of passed it. Now we've given enough. There never is that give enough. And it's because, again, we're not looking for equality. We're not looking for inclusion. We're not looking for all the things that they say that they're trying to fix. If that were the case, then they could say, if this were done, then we would, that would make it right. We're also talking about something, looking back, people may get very upset at this. Nobody is alive today that remembers slavery. Now, you could talk about Jim Crow laws. You could talk about a lot of things where people were alive and there's some racism there. Nobody's alive during slavery. So we talk about, yeah, but that was that was the ancestor that did it. Look, a lot of our ancestors had a lot of things in our past that probably wasn't good. Have you seen Appalachia? Have you seen what they've done in Appalachia and some of the people and what they've been through? Reparations doesn't solve very much because it's still continuing the divisive problem. So all of this, to kind of sum up this point, it's all rooted in divisiveness. And the way we know this is, can we take the exact opposite? You have Black History Month in February. Where's White History Month? You have specific days or specific things that are Black-owned businesses. Could you imagine in the NBA Finals watching a TV or watching a commercial that advocates for white-owned businesses the way that you did see for Black-owned businesses? Amazon pushing white-owned businesses. You don't see it. So if we're talking about inclusion, if we're talking about equality, if we're talking about coming together and being one as a nation, that's not what we're talking about, right? Otherwise, you'd start seeing those things. And I think we need to start calling that out where we see it. I think that's really what this comes from is, again, the Juneteenth, a great celebration that we did end slavery. That is fantastic. But to what end are we doing all of these things? Is it to really make reparations? Is it? And once we do, then what? We all live together. We all get along. I don't see that being the case, because the more that you silence one faction of the country, specifically one that has like 70% plus of the people, and you silence that, that doesn't sit well with a lot of people. You say, well, you've had your day. White men founded the country. I'm sorry, like white men founded America. Therefore, yes, white men have had their say. Whatever you can say, well, now it's time to sit down. Name another country where that works. Name another country where a small minority comes in and they tell the Chinese, the Chinese government, hey, well, we need, those that are of a smaller subsection going into a much larger country and demanding these things. Every country would say, absolutely not. We're proud of our heritage and where we came from. That's just in America that we can't do that. So,
well, and this is highlighted, and we're about to get into some biblical principles here, but I think I don't want to quote who it was because I don't remember, but Robin DiAngelo is the one who wrote White Fragility, and I don't know if it was her that said it. Maybe one of you guys can correct me if it's not her. It probably wasn't. But the whole idea that it's not enough just to not be racist. What do you have to be? Anti-racist was their big claim. Basically, the idea that you can't say what Joe is saying, which is let's all come together and just kind of move on past it. No. You have to vocally speak. You've got to change your profile picture. You've got to celebrate the two national anthems.
And silence is violence.
Right. And you've got to celebrate the black power that we've got the Little Mermaid that's coming out with that, all the black athletes are coming out and just, man, this is so awesome. And, that's what they say is that you have to go and be anti-racist. I want us to bring some biblical principles into this question of how should a Christian view the concept of race. I don't think we need to, have much discussion on the fact that obviously a Christian should not be racist. I think everybody agrees that is something that is anti-biblical, and we can quibble over what exactly being a racist means. Galatians 3:28 is commonly quoted to kind of by the egalitarians about women's roles and how men are equal to women, because it's the verse, there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And people will use that and mischaracterize it to say men and women should basically have the same roles when it comes to the church. But you read the New Testament, what is present throughout basically all of it? There's this Jew-Gentile dynamic, right? Because these were two quote-unquote races, so to speak, two groups of people that for the majority, or I guess for all of the Old Testament, and then for a lot of the New Testament, what were they? They were opposed to each other. They didn't like each other. They were very different. And we see examples like where this is something that Peter was victim of this, right? Peter would treat Jews differently than he treated Gentiles after they obeyed the gospel, and when he shouldn't have done that anymore, he was still doing that. And so I think these are examples that we see in the New Testament of this idea of maybe treating somebody different based on external appearances. That's never okay. We get that in James. We get that in, obviously, Galatians 3, as I'm talking about. Jesus in John 4, Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus didn't care. Jesus talked to the Samaritan woman, right? And so obviously I think these are biblical principles in the sense that we shouldn't judge anybody based off of their appearance or look down on them simply because of the color of their skin. I'm assuming, I don't think anybody listening to this would disagree with that. But where we have to get into is to what point are we, again, kind of celebrating the divisiveness? Anything you guys would have to add to the scriptures that we have, and how should a Christian view this concept?
I think defining the racist thing as you kind of did there is so important, because we're at this point, and I mean, you can Google news articles where almost everything has been labeled racist or white supremacist. Math is racist, and growing up with parents is racist. And I mean, and it's one of these things where it shows how much racial animosity they're projecting, like how much they carry with them, that they see these things this way. And so not everything that is claimed as racist is racist. As you say, preferential treatment, disliking somebody because of the color of their skin, that's racism. That is wrong. All the things that are labeled racism today, no. And so make sure you're sticking to that definition on God's terms of not treating people differently. And so those are biblical principles. I do think it's weird, interesting, worth wrestling with, where Paul says in Romans 9, that I would give my own soul for my kinsmen according to the flesh, for the Jewish brothers. He does not say that about the Gentile brethren. And so there is a national, we very much as Christians do that. Well, we're We're not of this world. We're not really Americans. We're not to be patriotic. We're not to have national identity or loyalty or anything else. Paul did. And one of the things that the Bible emphasizes in the prophets and Revelation is the nations will come streaming to the mountain of the house of the Lord, and people from every tribe and nation and tongue. And so, like, it is a reality that you are certain things, and accepting that is okay, but that doesn't make you better or worse than anybody else. That doesn't make you that doesn't give you a right to look down on somebody else, to treat somebody else like garbage because they're not. And so that is a reality that's out there, because we run to the other side sometimes of, well, none of this exists. And that was one of the big debates of the last few years. Are we supposed to be colorblind? And you're supposed to be yes and no. You're supposed to be colorblind in that I will treat you the same regardless of all of these factors. You're not supposed to be colorblind in the fact of we are different, and that's okay. And that's, we come from different places, and that's okay. And we belong to certain groups and tribes. We're not totally detached from this earth and who we're
just
born
like
into. Your family name, says so much about you. Go ahead.
I was just saying, just like the male female thing, right? Like, yeah, just because we're equal in God's sight and in God's eyes when it comes to salvation, to pretend like we are the same person and we should be gender blind, right? Nobody says that. And so I gotta be honest, I think that gets us into this question that I kind of already previewed. We've already hit on it a little bit. What should our attitude be? Should we be colorblind? I mean, there's a lot of people that is going to be their answer. I don't see race. Morgan Freeman again. We'll just stop talking about it. Don't even acknowledge it. Versus the side of what you were just talking about. No, we are different. Highlight the differences. Celebrate the differences. Maybe I shouldn't say highlight. Acknowledge the differences. Don't hide from them. Don't bury them. Right. That's really what we want to get to here. So where do you guys fall on that? As somebody, when I first saw that Morgan Freeman quote, or I guess that was a video that I saw, goodness, 5-6 years ago, whenever, I was like, oh man, that's a really good take. I completely agree with that. My thinking shifted a little bit, but I want to open it up to you guys first. Where do we fall
concrete
on
examples so people know what we're talking about? I've known Black Christians who have put in work for the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Obviously it was named that long back in the day, but that is about, or the United Negro College Fund, another old institution, but that works for the advancement of Black people, and they talk about Black excellence and lifting up our community and all that, and they're involved in young kids and the fatherless and things like that, trying to encourage education and careers and achievement and family, positive things. But the question is, what if there was what if people like you and I started working on, okay, I'm going to go out and try and help white kids go to college. I'm going to try and make sure white kids have solid careers. I'm going to dedicate specifically to white kids at the exclusion of people of other races, not Hispanic kids, not Black kids. This is for the white kids. I'm going to really donate to and put time and money into white colleges and white schools and white efforts and just things that are going to help white people get ahead, or not get ahead, but succeed in life. And I think to a lot of people that's very jarring. Joe brought up earlier the Black owned businesses thing that you can search and there's labels that get put on stuff. Black owned business. Should a Christian shop at white owned business? And I think the point we're getting at here is your answer has to be one or the other. That white people should not do that, nor should Black people, or it's okay for Black folks to do it, so it's okay for everybody else to do it as well. For Hispanics to work to the good of the Hispanic community, for whites to work to the good of other white folks, and all of these other things. And people can run in with well, white folks are already doing fine, they don't need help. It's not the point. The question is, do you have license to preferentially push for and help people who look like you, people who have similar roots to you, whatever it may be, the same skin color as you? Yes or no? This can't be a double standard, but it has been a double standard up to this point. So I guess the question, to reiterate what Will's saying, is, do we go the Morgan Freeman route and say, no, we should indiscriminately, just whoever it is, we're going to help young kids get ahead and succeed? Or is it okay to prioritize your quote unquote community? And so, yeah, just to give more concrete so people know what we're talking about as we go into this.
That I don't want to have to be the first one to speak after that. That's because
You got it, Joe. All you.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, going back to what Paul did, I think it's okay to look at the differences. It's okay to and to support one another and to support your brethren, whether that be white, black, whatever it may be. I also don't believe that you should boycott the other, a black person's business because you're white or vice versa. I think if, hey, you're going down the street but more than anything, I think what you'll find is they care less about race than they do about friendships. So if you have two guys, let's say you have, Will and Jack, and let's say Will was an African American and I just happen to have a good relationship with him, then I'm probably going to shop at Will's store because the relationship matters to me more than the whiteness of my skin, even though Jack is white. So I think those things are really going to make more of a difference. But to your point, Jack, if we're just sticking strictly to it, I think that's, I don't think it's wrong to necessarily support and, as you said, celebrate the differences. One of my biggest issues is cultural appropriation because I think that is a way for people to celebrate the differences, to celebrate that, hey, this is part of our culture, and I think that's really cool, and other people should be able to honor that culture. Whoa, that's cultural appropriation. You can't use it. No, but I'm taking the best parts, the festive parts, the celebratory parts, and I'm saying that's really cool. Let's lift that up. And they're shutting all of that down, and I think that kind of cuts across it.
It's an English language term.
What's that?
Cultural appropriation. It's an English language term. You're culturally appropriating to
I thought he was
the
making
term.
a joke or something.
Oh,
I'm not
yeah,
making a joke. It's like, what do you mean cultural appropriation? You're using a language that white guys 700 years ago to describe something like, if we all have to stick to our own stuff, you don't get to do that. Like again, it goes to the whole double standard thing. If this can go one way but not the other, which direction should it go? Like, should it be going both ways or should it not at all? And so,
and
go ahead, Will.
I was just going to say, I think the other distinction that needs to be made here as well, talking about the black-owned businesses thing, is they might not say this, but a lot of the people that would say, well, I only want to shop at the black-owned businesses or whatever, are wishing detriment to the white-owned business. They're doing it for the purpose of, well, we need to. It's not just to, well, let's lift our other brethren up. It's let's punish these white guys, right, and the white businesses. And that's, again, a lot of people. That's not everybody. That's a general statement. I understand that, but especially you look at culture and society. That's the goal, is to quote unquote punish the ones that already have the privilege. And so I don't necessarily disagree with Joe in the sense that theoretically we should be able to celebrate our brethren and our countrymen, but it's got to go both ways. It's got to be able to, again, not to the detriment of anybody else, but to say, hey, I've got a good relationship with this person. They are a part of our. But here's the question I want to bring up though. In the church, shouldn't all those things be erased? Shouldn't me? And I know y'all already brought up Paul and what he said in Romans chapter 9, but theoretically, I don't know. As I'm thinking through it, you should see a kind of erasure of the black versus the white, as far as, I mean, we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. My family, my relatives are not just the people that are the color of my own skin. They are those who have obeyed the gospel. Like, how many of you guys are, if you have a buddy who is a faithful Christian that owns a business, you're going to go support him, right? Or her, I guess, regardless of the color of their skin. Go ahead.
Well, and to that point, I would say race is very much the broad reaching thing. To get back to your point about the church, about my point with friends, look, if I know there's a White Bluff business, because I'm from White Bluff, Tennessee, that's where I live. I'm from Denver, but I live in White Bluff, Tennessee. If I'm going into Nashville and I know there's a guy from White Bluff that is, at this convention or whatever, or let's say he's at, farmer's market, I'm going to go hit him up. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go buy from him because it's like, that's White Bluff pride, right? Like I'm proud to be from White Bluff. I'm glad he's doing well. I want to make sure his business is supported. Nobody would have a problem with that. I don't think. And so I think the race is very much on the broad reaching. When you start breaking it down, in my opinion, and I think the church is very much where you see this the most, race does start to matter less. It does start to be something that personally, I couldn't care less about shopping at a white or a black owned business. Whatever's going to give me the best product, or again, if I know the person, to be consistent. The reason why I say the white own, I think it's to be consistent, you can help out, but I think people are less concerned about the race. They're more concerned about their immediate circumstances. I absolutely will support somebody from White Bluff, whether they're white or black, just because I'm proud of that city. or of that little town, right? And same for the church, not to cut you off, Will, but again, I think it goes same for the church. Like, I'm part of an organization, I'm part of a family that doesn't see that, like, that doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it's erased the same way you didn't erase Jews and Gentiles. They still did things differently. That's half of what Romans is about. But that's okay. We're all one in Christ. We're all supporting each other. And so the race stops being the line of support. Jack, what are your
Right.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, to your point about it's not erased. It's still there, but you work through it. I'm going to go even a little further with your illustration about White Bluff or whatever. We're from Denver. If I see a guy out here with a Denver Broncos shirt 1,000 miles away, and you talk to him, and man, he's from Denver. It's not only that we like the same football team. I can rattle off a series of inside jokes we would have together about, man, people with their Subarus, with the bike rack that costs more than the Subaru itself, and King Super's donuts, and just local stuff, that means stuff to us that we have in common. That I don't know the guy that I shouldn't have if you're doing this whole, like, we're all blank slates, we don't have loyalty to people, we do. And so I'm going to be drawn to him more, and we're going to have those things in common. And honestly, the black community has this way more than the white community. I mean, they call each other brothers, whether Christian or not. That's something that's there. And with the auntie and uncle thing, these are cultural things that you pick up on, and it's like we don't do that. And so they have that camaraderie and that connection and ways of growing up, ways they were raised versus ways other people were raised, that they can just bond over in the same way I can bond with a guy from Denver. And so when they bring that together, they're going to click ahead of other people. And then when they're around white Christians, it's kind of like I said, I've picked up on this from being around them. We had a buddy back in preaching school. Shout out to Q. I'm sure he doesn't listen. I got to see him last year. Surprised me out of nowhere. Showed up somewhere I was speaking, and so good to see him. Hadn't talked to him in years, but a black brother. And man, the racial differences between us were very clear, but it was kind of a fun thing. Like, we acknowledged that we knew when we're a little bit different culturally, a little bit different references and point of reference growing up. And so that was a point that brought us together, was even teasing each other about certain things in both directions. And just a cool dude. And he was like that with a lot of guys there, a lot of us white folks. He was, in the minority there. And so that is that erasure of barriers thing you're talking about, of like, and a lot of times with a black Christian, the next time they see another black Christian, they're going to have things in common with them that they don't with me, but we can all be cool together. We can all work through those things, but we don't have to pretend nature doesn't exist. You don't have to pretend that you don't have things in common with somebody that you do. And if those things are things that endear you to each other, because man, commonality is the beginning of friendship, right? Commonality is that part where you look at somebody and go, hey, we share something, and you build on that. And so that is there. That is real. You don't deny that. But as you're saying, the gospel makes it to where you don't have to have the commonality to come together, because you love each other even without the commonality. And so it's a good, but it's also not something we should pretend doesn't exist either, that we can, just because we can love each other and grow through it and build stronger bonds than the world ever could, doesn't mean there's not preference. There's not natural things. And so, like you said, I wouldn't go out of the way to shop for something that said white owned business. But again, if there was a guy who ran a restaurant from Denver, I would go there more. I like it. I would connect with him. I'd have something there. And so that's not the same thing, but it's a very similar thing.
Sure. I think that's very well said, and honestly sums up kind of that discussion pretty well. And so, yeah, I mean, let's bring it back around to the Juneteenth thing. I personally have never had a Juneteenth barbecue or whatever it is that people do for, I've not celebrated Juneteenth. And so with the question of should a Christian celebrate it, I think should's the wrong word. I think, can might be a bit of a better word there. And Jack kind of already said this. I think it would be good to celebrate it as part of our history, because it is a very important part of our history. It's a very important part of our nation. Again, the freedom that everybody now enjoys. I think where you get into problems is when you take it beyond a family celebration or just kind of recognizing it. I mean, there are holidays that a lot of people choose not to celebrate for one reason or another, and I don't think you can look down on anybody for choosing not to celebrate a holiday. I think everybody needs to take inventory of, by celebrating this, by what I do on social media, by my conversations, am I contributing to the divisiveness? And I think that's the ultimate question that you need to ask yourself. But I think you can celebrate this particular holiday without doing that. What do you guys have to say, I guess, to this kind of wrap up question that ties it back to today, June 19th?
I would agree. I mean, I think it points to an important part of our history. For that reason, there's a lot of things that point to an important part of our history that I think is perfectly fine. Memorial Day, obviously July 4th, even Labor Day. I mean, there's history behind every single one of these things. And there's history behind this one, no doubt. This was used. We used this to spark, not to say we shouldn't celebrate Juneteenth. We use this to spark the greater discussion of let's use this as an opportunity to really springboard into becoming more close knit as a nation, and to stop looking so much at ways we can be divisive, or ways that there's the oppressed versus the not oppressed. Okay, maybe that's there, but the way we get out of it is not by flipping the script. The way we get out of it is by working toward these things. And I think the start of that is by recognizing we have been working toward these things, and we're one of the most progressive nations in the planet when it comes to race. We have to realize that. People that say that we're a racist country have never been outside the country. I have been fortunate, I think I said on the last podcast, to travel a lot. And I've been to multiple different continents. And in every single one of them, I would say race is nearly on almost all of them more of a struggle than it is in America, in terms of true racism. And I think we have to be able to admit that as well, that we are on our way to really working on this and to fixing this, and to being more equal, and to being more close knit as a country. And that's what we're all looking for. And especially in the church, that's what we're praying for as well. Jack?
That is the question. Are we trying to become Americans together in these social things, and Christians together, or are we really trying to keep ourselves divided into silos? And so how you use a holiday like this is kind of like, well, you got yours and now we get ours. This is all of our history, and it's a bad part of our history. It's it was an unfortunate thing they had to go through. It was a terrible thing, all of that. But you come out of it a we. The point was the fight to be included, to become part of the family, to be full-fledged Americans, not to be white Americans and black Americans. And so that I'm not trying to contradict what we said about being colorblind, but as a nation, this is all of our history, and we learn to exist together. And so I'll celebrate yours, you celebrate mine. We'll all celebrate, it's a shared history, even if there are things that separate us along different lines that are naturally there, that we're not denying. And so, yeah, I don't think it's healthy to live out separate histories and separate timelines and separate goals and all of those things. And so that's not how a nation works. That's how a nation falls apart. I mean, united we stand, divided we fall, all of those things. And the scriptural principles here of coming together. And the nation is not Christian, it's not the church, but still, these are biblical principles for unity and how to get along with people. And separating ourselves intentionally is not ever a path to unity. So that would be my take as well. Yeah, pay attention. Like it's a positive thing. Let's not make it something it's not. Let's not make it a political tool, I think, more than anything.
Yeah. Great summarization. I think we are going to wrap right there. We don't have much else to add to that. As always, we welcome the feedback, any comments that anybody wants to leave, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. We have gotten our fair share of not pleasant ones, and so we say it every time. We're going to reiterate it. Keep it civil. We want these discussions to be open. We want them to be honest, and we want you to think deeper, as Jack brilliantly stated in his monologue to start the episode. That's what all this is about. And so, as always, we appreciate you listening, guys. Anything else to add before we wrap up this week's episode? If not, we will conclude right there. We thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with another episode.